funding us last year, creating the environment and the opportunity for us to host 4 different breakfasts last year, and allowing us to continue with this very important discussion this morning. As I've mentioned, together with the School for Public Leadership here at the University of Stellenbosch, the Centre for Constitutional Rights decided to create an environment, a series not to preach, not to bring ideas, not to convince our audience of anything, but to create a platform where we can discuss. Create an environment where we can discuss sensitive and difficult constitutional matters, especially in context of public leadership, which South Africa badly needs. This is an opportunity for those who attend for the first time to participate, to engage, to be frank, and to do so in an amicable environment over a cup of coffee and breakfast, so that we can discuss pertinent issues to the interest of South Africa. Dames en heren, vir u wat dit die eerste keer bywoon, baie welkom. Ons voer die gesprek in Engels om dit moontlik te maak vir al ons buitelandse gaste om deel te wees. In order to accommodate proper discussion, the conversation is conducted in English. However, feel free to ask questions in a language of choice. Where possible, we'll try and assist you to translate.
Except German.
We can certainly accept German to a certain extent. Ladies and gentlemen, my privilege to invite my colleague, Schweller, from the Public Leadership School here at Stellenbosch to welcome you as well. Thank you very much and enjoy.
And to be clear, colleagues, friends, on behalf of the School of Public Leadership at Stellenbosch University, it is once again a great opportunity for us to have conversations. We believe that you need to have ideas, and ideas can change the world, but you have to communicate those ideas, and then you have to act on those ideas. We had a fantastic day yesterday with our colleagues from Konrad Adenauer and many other people at the commemoration of the speech of President de Klerk, 2nd of February 1990. And we will continue this conversation. It was mentioned yesterday that we have actually lost impetus on the good governance conversation. And we would like to provide a space within a university setting to continue this good governance conversation, which is really necessary in South Africa. From our side, we also like to work with metaphors. And it seems as if one of the metaphors that we have, as it were, invented here or explains the situation, it is a bit like a magnet. We are now attracting very interesting, perhaps somewhat strange people, but very interesting in any case people, and we're attracting them from across the spectrum. Secondly, if you have a magnet, you only need to do one more thing. You need to create some armature with a copper wiring around it, put it around the magnet, and then start turning it. And then what you have is a dynamo. So we want to have the magnet to attract strange and interesting people, put an armature around it, and create a dynamo within which we act. We cannot only talk and think, we must also act. So it's a great privilege today to continue our conversation on public leadership in the context of the Constitution, and we select very specifically themes. You will remember the last one last year was on the media, we had one on the youth, we had one on South Africa with President de Klerk, and these were all very well served our needs very well. Today it is on security, and I'm going to hand over to the program director for today, Chris Botha, who was a colleague of Johan, both of them in current terms after the remilitarization of the South African Police Service. Is it now a force already again? But in any case, and if it's a force, is it a force for the good? So we can raise numbers of questions. However, they were both major generals in the South African police, and then also Professor Beate Neuss, is that the correct translation or pronunciation? Who will be our speakers. Finally, we continue this conversation. In this group today, you have a number of my leadership in the Harbour fellows and associates, and after this morning's breakfast, we will go up for our inclusive innovation session in the other building. And for those of you who want to join for a short period at 9 o'clock there and see what my brilliant young colleagues, where are they? Always when I call on them, They're working. They're working. You see, I'm here for the show. Yeah? They're here for the work. Although, if you look at our faces, it should be the other way around. However, they've prepared a fantastic setting there where you don't have a classroom but an innovation space. And you're welcome to quickly pop in there and even sit in for a short while. They immediately now angry at me because I confound all of their arrangements, but that's fine. We create order out of chaos. Thank you very much. Enjoy the session.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We have our two speakers, and it is my pleasure to introduce them today. Professor Beate Neuss here is Professor of International Relations at the Technical University Chemnitz, and she's also the Chairwoman of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And it is such a pleasure to have you here, Professor. Dr. Johan, as you know, we've been colleagues for many years. Is a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, based in Pretoria, but working all over the world, and also Professor Extraordinarius at the University of South Africa. Thank you. Professor Neuss.
Good morning, everybody. I'm surprised that you are up so early. Definitely you would have difficulties in Germany to find so many persons at 7 o'clock around in an academic situation. And well, for myself, it's the first talk I give at that time. And first of all, I hope my English is already awoken, as well as my brain as such. And I must say that I admire a lot of things in South Africa, but especially how easily you switch between languages. So please forgive if my switching between German and English is not as perfect as your switching. Well, as you can see by the map, insecurity guaranteed, global challenges and risks. I talk from a German perspective, European perspective, or from a Western or Northern Hemisphere perspective, and I'm curious to hear later about the perspective from this part of the world. So, the European map, that's right on there. When we talk about international risks and security dangers and challenges, we have something which is new, because the size and the complexity of the challenges is much larger than it has been before at any time in history. That is, first of all, because of globalization. That means that even very far away conflicts affect other continents. One example from Germany, we had this tsunami in Japan, and 3 days later, Germany gave up atomic energy production. At least the decision was taken. And no, it's not. I think it's okay. Okay, I'll try it this way. Problems are very interdependent nowadays. One problem creates the next one. If you give up atomic energy, you have to find something to put it in place instead. And you have crises on different levels, on local levels and on global levels, which are interconnected and accumulate challenges for the political decisions. And these leads to escalation of the challenges and dangers. The challenges are coming from the global level, often enough at least, and the answers are mostly local. That means that we decide from the German perspective. We decide from a European perspective and don't see enough that we should react all together. And this is why sometimes the answers to challenges are so late or so weak. That has to do with the fact that we look onto the world from different perspectives. The world, if you just look at the world map, it's completely different if you look at it and the regions where you think there are challenges, if you look from Europe or you look from a different part. The first time I realized that was sitting in the Chinese foreign ministry looking at a map at the board, and I saw that the map was completely differently done, and I realized how the world looked like from China. Different. So the challenges Europe has in the east of Europe and the south of the Mediterranean are different from the American perspective. They have no neighbors practically, and we have a lot. And from the Chinese. And you can imagine that it looks even much more different from South Africa, which I wasn't able to put in blue. My technique was not sufficient. I just put a list of the challenges and we can discuss them later. We have a rise of new and old powers, which often act as imperial powers. We have the global demographics. I come to these topics later. We have coming up of wars again. Not that they had stopped at all, but we have reoccurring wars, which are severe challenges for the rest of the world, and we have different forms of war. Interstate wars, they are still there. We have hybrid warfare, which is a very new topic in Europe. We see it in Ukraine. That means that, let's take Russia. Russia is invading Ukraine, but not with regular forces, but with disguised forces, with irregular, well, they are not declared to be Russian soldiers, but they are Russian special forces without giving identity. And we don't have an answer to this hybrid warfare. We have asymmetric wars between civil rights, civil groups and states. We have these wars for religious reasons, for ethnic reasons. And we have, that is part of the hybrid warfare, we have fights between regular troops and irregular civil servants troops, and privatization of war by hiring security firms like Blackwater with contract fighters. And the role of warlords. Then we have the big topic of failed states, in which safe haven is given to organized crime, to terrorism, to organized crime with all the specters which belong to it, like money laundering, like building up irregular fighters, and so on. The proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, which worry us a lot in Europe because of Iran not giving up nuclear ambitions, but because other states are ambitious
to have nuclear weapons as well, but we see that chemical weapons are dangerous, as we have experienced in the Syrian war. A new topic, which is interacting with all the other topics I'm talking about today, is cyber war, which can result in espionage, in sabotage, and is a weapon in itself. We don't have seen any conflict between groups or states lately in which cyber war was not involved. In the war in Georgia in 2008, in the Syrian war now, in the Ukrainian war, we always have the fact of the cyber war included. Climate change, of course, is producing new dangers, and I said it's the interdependency between all these challenges. That is one of the factors which produces this interdependency. Pandemia is one of the factors which we were reminded lately with Ebola. I know that the number of Ebola, and I could name much better HIV, AIDS, the number of Ebola sick person and dying person is not really substantial. But what is substantial are the results of it. That means that in Western Africa, the economy and the food security is very much challenged and could break down. Tourism breaks down. SARS has shown it, that the tourism was breaking down in China. We have the shift of global weights between old states, new states, emerging economies, which create a new climate between where the new balance has to be found between governments and between the states, and they have to work very hard on finding out who is in charge in global order. We don't really know it because they are non-state international actors as well. So we don't only have the new powers, the old powers, emerging powers, but additionally we have actors which we haven't seen in former centuries or former decades, non-state international actors like business and other non-governmental organizations. Food security, scarcity of resources is a very big problem. Just now we see that the dropping of oil price is on the other side. I mean, this time many states profit by the oil price going down, the abundance of oil. But on the other hand, those states suffer who have their income from oil and gas. But let it turn around the other way, and we will see it again. Then everything will be attached by it, because even in all products you have oil, and even in food production you need oil. So the scarcity of one of the commodities can lead to scarcity of other commodities or rising prices. Megacities. We all know that, especially in Africa and Asia, there are huge cities. One of the biggest is Japan, but that's in Japan, Tokyo, but that is well managed. But there are other cities which grow so rapidly that there are quarters and neighborhoods where no state is present. So in these regions of states, there can develop not only diseases, but terrorism, for instance, organized crime for sure. So we have to see how we will manage to have more than 60% of the world population in huge cities and how to manage these cities. Migration is coming from the growing world population and from all the crises I have managed. And this is a huge topic in Europe because because of the wars and because of the turmoil in the southern Mediterranean region, we have a huge influx of fugitives and migrating people. So we see an escalation ladder when one of the problems comes to the other, or even a third and a fourth one, but the problem solving capacity is rather weak. First of all, we need to work together, and that means worldwide. Second, and this will stay with us, the problem that if you look at governments, in the end there are 1 or 2 persons who decide, and the day has 24 hours. So if you have more than 3 international problems, additionally some national problems, we really see that the attention is going away from other very important things which cannot be solved at the time that it should be solved. I come to some examples to show you some of the graphics and the data I have collected. One problem of new powers might rise from China. China is far away from Europe, but China is claiming sovereignty over a huge region of the ocean, a very important region for all sea lanes of communication, sea lanes of trade. So China is in quarrel with its neighbors, and this includes indirectly the United States, because the United States give guarantee for Taiwan, for instance, for Japan. And we see that the legitimation is history as often. And we see additionally that Japan is going on the same course, claiming territory on the ocean for itself, because they suppose that there are resources to be found. And even far away from Europe, we are afraid of what might come out of this, because as a partner of the United States, in a way or another, we would be certainly be involved, and especially as a trading nation, as what Germany is, we would have difficulties to trade with our partners if there would arise some kind of war. I talked already about Russia. Russia is going back to claiming territories of sovereign states in Europe, asking for special spheres of influence. So just talking about the near abroad, which means that these states should not have full sovereignty to decide who is to whom they want to link, European Union, NATO, but asking for neutrality of these states, or even more, to have more influence. I'm very ready to talk about Ukraine later, but I don't have the time during this short presentation. And then again, it's a combination of history, which is used for legitimation, and the ideology is nationalism, which is promoted extremely right now in Russia. Just short impression how severe the problem is. Russia says that it has to care for all people, Russian people abroad, and because of the history of the Soviet Union, we have a lot of Russians which were settled there to secure the power of the Soviet Union in this region, in other countries. So Europe is really nervous about the Russian politics. New phase of war, I was talking about hybrid warfare before. We have state and non-state actors, conventional troops, intelligence services, organized crime, and they are connected. We know that Russian cyber activities are connected with the Russian mafia, are connected with regular Russian troops, and with nationals from the neighboring states as well. Fishing boats was one of the things that the Chinese are sending fishing boats to the regions they claim, and then when they are attacked, they come with their blue navy. We have changed between the levels of war so that we have a lawless space, we have unidentifiable combatants, as I said in the beginning already. So, as I said, we don't have an answer to that. And economic warfare is done as well by Russia and as by China. And it's always connected, additionally, it's connected with cyber war and propaganda done by the internet. And this is one of our worries, how to deal with it. I think we have to adjust international law to somehow cope with the new hybrid warfare, to somehow know how to find an answer to the fact that Russia says it doesn't have troops in Ukraine, but that we know for sure that there are several thousand soldiers from Russia. For instance, just as an example, happens in other states as well. The warfare has changed in another way. We have fights already since some time, which are done from civil institutions like mosques, like churches, like schools, and so that to fight those fighters from our perspective is very difficult because we have collateral damage, meaning civil persons dying when we answer to those attacks. Demographics. I think that one of the most important driver of international challenges and international dangers are demographics. The world is growing more rapidly than we have thought until recently. By the United Nations gave the new numbers. The numbers are rising much more than we thought. And we see that the old world is shrinking, with the exception of the United States, which will stay practically stable. But other less developed countries, and this is primarily Africa and parts of Asia, the population is rising tremendously. And the numbers I will show you now are numbers which are really frightening, because I don't see a solution to this problem. You see, the median age is the age where half of the population is older and half of the population is younger. You see that Africa is the youngest continent of all. And I show you some numbers, of age. If you imagine you have a large population where half of the population is younger than 18 years. Do you have any idea how to give so many young men income? Not to speak about the women. And what a young man who wants to found a family will come up with ideas when he sees he has no chance at all. South Africa is one of the older states in Africa, and Germany is a very old state. And I see when I come to South Africa how old we are. We have our own problems with that, of course. I'm not talking about that due to time. And that means a shift of importance in world politics, and in the end, a shift in power. The declining importance made up by demographics In Europe, you can see by the numbers we have from 1950 and to 2010, and the prognosis for 2050, the importance of Africa will rise, of course. Refugees is one of the results of wars, but especially as well of the demographics. We have to deal with a lot of displaced persons worldwide, and this turns into national problems. In Europe, you may have followed that all European countries, including Germany's, you have groups who fight against migrants, or argue at least, or protest on streets against, not fighting violently mostly, but protesting on the street against migrants, against immigration. And that means if the influx is quickly and in huge numbers, you have destabilization of states and even regions. This is more so the case in the region of the Great Lakes in Africa and of course in the Mediterranean. If you think of all these Syrian fugitives to the neighborhood, that's really frightening because the states are not stable. Demographics means, or the demographic numbers mean, that we will need more of everything, more of energy, more of food and water. And I have learned that you have difficulties with your electricity here. Well, yes, that is one of the one result of industrialization and modernization, and the other result, of course, of more people. And this is a high challenge to provide these commodities to the growing population. I just give you an idea about cyber war, because this is really the effect which we are very much, think tanks are very much, and security people are very much afraid of, because you can, there's an American quote from an anonymous military. He said, the cyber war danger is as dangerous as an atomic bomb. You can really bring down a whole society by cyber war. And I listed up the whole spectrum of cyber war you see there. The problem is that we have no deterrence so far, because it's very cheap to try to attack a state and be finally successful, or a company, or an electricity plant, or whatever, or a bank. It's very cheap to try and try again, and it's very expensive to stop it. And the growth is really frightening. We have so many attacks daily, and the costs, as I said, is low, but the defense high, and it's really a tax for innovation, as it is called, because it damages new innovations. They are stolen, for instance, and competition is not as it should be, but irregular because of espionage, for instance. It's going very much, it's diminishing the growth of GDP. The numbers are climbing each year. So it's estimated for Germany that it's 1.6% less GDP growth than we should have without cyber war. And the United States gives the number of 0.64 reduction of GDP growth. A quick look on pandemia, just to remind you, which probably is not necessary because of HIV and AIDS, which is strong in your country, that you have a quick spread of some infection diseases which damage the economy very much, and then affect the whole society because of the resulting consequences. Well, the question is, how do we deal with all these challenges? First of all, we have to get conscious about it, and we have to be conscious about it even in local administrations and so on. And we don't have, as in former times, two actors on the world level like the United States and the Soviet Union who care for order, how much we like it or not. But now we have so many actors on the world level, but global governments is not there nevertheless. We have transnational enterprises which should take up which should be included in the solutions. We have the NGOs who work on solutions, but we have so many actors from bad sides like organized crime and internet communities that shows that nobody really seems to be in charge. The United States is no longer the prime player on the world level. Russia is not the prime player. China is rising to be a prime player, and Europe is rather weak because of its the way it is constituted as an organization where, especially in foreign and security affairs, states still are sovereign, and to come up with a consent is very hard work. We see it right now with the Ukrainian crisis, how long the negotiations are, whether we should have sanctions or not, and how strong they should be. And so whenever international challenge is coming up, it's a hard time for Europe to really come to a position where they can be a global player. And as a European, I'm convinced we need to. So Ian Bremmer is talking about the zero world, the world in which nobody is leading and guiding and taking care for order. The G7 and G20 is trying hard, but not really doing. This is something I put in for discussion, but I think we don't have the time. But I would like to close with the first Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. He said, "The abandonment of world politics does not protect against its results." That's what I'm always telling my European listeners. We have to engage in the solution of these challenges, and we have to do it again. And that is because we don't live in a century of world wars, but in a century of wars in the world. And with these sentences, I would like to thank you very much for your attention that early in the morning.
Shall I sit down and you finish, and then we take it from here?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you, Professor Neuss. I think you set the world stage for me to follow a little more focused in terms of the situation in South Africa. I decided for the purpose of this discussion, this thing is loud. It's got to be okay, is this better? Okay, I'll use this one. What I decided to do when I was asked by Chris to come and speak to you this morning was to try and focus the discussion in terms of threats as far as South Africa is concerned. And the two threats I chose were public violence and crime. And I'll show you some slides to that effect. But of course, I'm certain all of us in South Africa knows that there are many more threats than these. And from time to time, I will perhaps just allude to that. What I want to then do is show you, I'll just pass through the slide on the ISS, but I will show you a few slides on public order incidents, and then to some extent also the public order police unit. Now, by the way, this was just to give you an indication, and I'll get to that towards the end of my presentation, also the whole issue of the role of the police in all of this, and also the whole question about militarization, demilitarization, remilitarization, and all of this that's become a problem all of its own. Interesting, this is in the United States, and I did a submission to the Americana Commission of Inquiry, where I pointed out what militarization is in global terms and how this has affected policing in South Africa. But I'll come to that towards the end. I'll also show you 6 slides on crime trends, just to get an indication of why I think that this is a growing threat, and then some slides in terms of the police. But I want to end on a more positive note by showing you the potential of the National Development Plan, if it ever gets implemented. So that in itself is, of course, another challenge. And those of you interested in my presentation are welcome to a copy, and then you can read this all on your own. But the Institute of Security Studies, of course, based in Pretoria, but we have offices in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Senegal as well. And the intention is to gradually broaden our scope, although we try and cover most of Africa from all of these offices. Then the Governance, Crime and Justice Division that I am part of, our focus is primarily South Africa at this moment, although we are expanding into Namibia, Mozambique, and also recently Kenya. I have been approached to assist the Kenyan police with the development of the National Crime Combat Strategy, as well as the Namibians. So hopefully we'll be working on that in the coming year. And of course, we work closely with academic institutions. Okay, this happened quite automatically. But let's start with public order incidents. And we see a very interesting development. Now, these are police stats. And they cover, as you will see there, peaceful incidents are all crowd-related assemblies, gatherings, and meetings. And then what they refer to as unrest or violence-related, crowd-related incidents. And you can see then, in the last few years, we've been relatively stable as far as the so-called peaceful incidents are concerned. But our concern is for those that are becoming violent. And you can see the growth. You'll see it better in the next slide. Okay, something I forgot. From a policing point of view, of course, is that it becomes a huge burden on resources of the police, because on a daily basis we have approximately 32 of these public events that the police have to maintain a presence at in terms of the regulation of Gatherings Act. And the violent ones, an average of 5 per day, where the police needs to have a more focused or concentrated presence. So you can imagine the burden that this has for the police service. But if we look at the violence, or the violent incidents, or incidents related to violence, we can see since 2004, and I'll show you another slide which goes back a little more even. But look at this trend, it's upward all the time. And when I did this slide, it occurred to me, if we had a barometer, and you hold a barometer next to this slide, you can imagine how the temperature is rising. And I'll show you one or two more slides that will illustrate this point even further. The previous one was about police stats. These are stats by Municipal IQ, the Hotspots Monitor, and then University of Johannesburg, the Social Change Research Unit. Now, the Municipal IQ incidents are the more important service delivery protests that they monitor on ongoing basis. And although it varies from year to year, you can see the trend is upwards. The University of Johannesburg, their monitor is about all kinds of community protests, which may include some service delivery protests, but it's more about the stuff that communities are generally concerned about. And this includes the high levels of unemployment, poverty, and all kinds of other social problems. And here again, the temperature is rising. In fact, Professor Peter Alexander from UJ describes this as the revolt of the poor. So it's much more than just service delivery or the lack of service delivery by local authorities or municipalities. There's a growing concern that communities are increasingly unhappy about this situation, and Professor Neuss has referred to the growing number of young people that are unemployed and the conditions that they have to live in. You know, the average unemployment rate in South Africa at the moment is about 26%. But if you go to some of these poorer communities, and we've seen this in Kailicha, for example, those of you who read the Kailicha Commission's report, the huge problems that exist in these areas, the unemployment rate is something like between 80 and 90%. It's really, it's a growing disaster just waiting to happen. So these are the problems that this country is faced with, and what we have as a response is the police service, which is a very limited response. Can't expect the police to deal with all of this, and the police have their own problems. Now, if you look at this slide, what I tried to do here was to show the SAPS figures, which shows this upward trend. Both these other institutions that are neutral, and that shows upward trends. In terms of the police, public order police units, the trend is the opposite. The capacity and capability of the public order police units is on the decline. We saw a slight upward trend here towards the 2010 Soccer World Cup. And you see the Soccer World Cup had a huge impact on many things in South Africa, infrastructure development and a range of other things, but also in terms of climate. We had an announcement last year by the police minister, the previous minister, where he promised that there will be an expansion because they realized that this is a problem. And over the next year, and the National Commissioner of Police the other day said that the target date is approximately 2020, when we will see the increase of police numbers in public order units from 4,700 to about 9,000. So Whether that is going to happen, I don't know. Whether 9,000 will be enough by the time we get to 2010, because then I think using the police to quell a primarily social problem. Now, just to illustrate with this picture, I took a few shots from the internet that it shows the conditions in some of our poorer communities. And there are many, many more that would illustrate this picture. Carrying water over large distances because there's a lack of basic infrastructure and so on. Now what happens is this kind of thing that it's becoming a daily feature of South African life, and the response is the police. Now what happens with the police, and I'm not defending them, I'm just stating the obvious. I'll come to the police, there's lots of criticism against the police. But the police then become the visible face of government in these areas. So you have highly frustrated communities who then are faced with the police as representative of government, and they take out their frustration on the police. Very often that results in violent conflict, and the police are not slow to react to this kind of situation, and they often then use more violence than is required in the circumstances. Now, let us look at your crime slides also. Now, we've had huge arguments with the police, and they have accused us of all kinds of things. But in terms of interpreting, I can show you many slides where we caught them out the previous year, 2013, where they used the wrong population figures to arrive at a slightly more positive result in terms of the crime situation. On average, they scored about 2%. Where murder, for example, increased by 2.6%, the police said it only increased by 0.6%. So, we now, since then, after they accused of all kinds of things, they now fixed the situation. They went back to the correct numbers. But if you look at murder, what we are concerned with is in a way, a subtle change that we are seeing after bringing down our crime rates since 1994. Most crime initially increased for the next 3-4 years, and then slowly but certainly started decreasing. Murder, for example, overall decreased by 54% since 1994. But you can see from these figures that I'm listing, you can see the rate at which murder decreased started slowing down. You can see that from more than 1,000 cases coming down, slowed to 894, 331. So it was easy for us to predict that very soon the murder rate would start increasing again. And this has happened over the last 2 years. So in terms of our murder rate, as well as attempted murder, we are moving again in the wrong direction. The same goes for, I just wanted to show you this slide in terms of what the provincial breakdown looks like. Cape Town, second only, or the Western Cape, second only to the Eastern Cape in terms of its murder rate. So I can't wait to get back on my plane this afternoon. Gauteng is relatively safe to where you are in this province. Well, we all know what all this means. Much of this is localized in the poorer communities. We know all of that. But still, this is not a very positive picture of what our crime looks like. So the police do not make too much of this. They focus on this picture and saying that our average murder rate has come down since 1994, when we were at about 67 per 100,000, we are now 32.2. But we were at less than that. We were at about 3 years ago, we were at about 30. So, and the international average is 6.2. So we are about 5 times the international average after 20 years of decrease, or 54% decrease. We still are 5 times the international average. The big problem, I believe, in South Africa at the moment, in terms of how people perceive their safety, is aggravated robbery. Now there are 7 subcategories of aggravated robbery, but the first 3 are the so-called trio crimes of house robbery, business robbery, and car hijacking. And those are the things that impact on people's perceptions of how safe we are. Even though you haven't been a victim yet, you read about these attacks all the time, and we all fear that this might happen to us because there's a real chance that it can happen to any one of us in this country. And the problem is that all of these crimes are increasing after some positive years of decline. It's moving in this direction. Now the police are quick, and I'm a former police myself, like Chris. And perhaps we did it in our time as well, did we, Chris? I don't know. I hope not. Try to be honest, but the police are quick to say to us when they publicly talk about the crime. It says, but we at the Institute are unnecessarily critical. We are looking for problems where there are, and we should look at the crime level, the overall graph, and they make an effort out of explaining why crime is moving in the right direction, with a positive impact. It's coming down if you look at that trend line. But we are saying to them is that's great, and it would have been great if that line continued downwards, but it's not. In the last 3 years, and we have to look at why, it's been increasing. And if you look at the next slide, you see those 3 crimes that I was referring to. Initially, over this period, the World Cup period, we saw a stabilization and even a drop as far as house robberies is concerned and hijacking. Business robberies stabilized, but it never decreased really. But in the last 3 years, we can see all of them going back up again. And they, in my view, nothing is in place that can stop this line from growing or continuing its upward trend, because the police service is largely in disarray at the moment. Its leadership is a mess. Its crime intelligence is almost non-functional, dysfunctional, and I'll show you 1 or 2 slides in that regard. So there are many good police officers still. We all know that. I have family in the police service. I have good friends, former colleagues, that are really trying to do their best. But we see what is happening to those who are trying to do their best, who are trying too hard. They are then faced with all kinds of stuff, such as suspensions, transfers, all kinds of things. So I'm extremely worried about what is happening here, and I'm not a large pessimist. But these are current South African realities. If we look at shopping centers, these huge mall robberies, then we see a huge problem developing, and we've been seeing this over the last 3 years. And if you just look at the number of armed robberies at shopping malls, I mean, there's been an increase of about 142% in the last 2 years. There's been a slight decrease in the financial loss, but that was due to alternative control measures taken by these individual targeted shops to better control their cash. So this continues to be a problem, and I'll come back to this. I think, let me just make this point. I think part of the problem is that our ability, and I'm talking about the police service again, our ability to generate the kind of intelligence that would enable us to target these organized crime syndicates has become almost non-existent. In fact, if you look at covert and overt operations, crime intelligence operations, that I'll show you in a moment, you see that there's been a huge decline in terms of overt operations. As far as covert operations, and I'm quoting from police reports, the annual reports of the police, not anything else, the police themselves. What they've done now with the covert operations, they left this, they started in 2011, I think, 2010 was the last time they mentioned the number of COVID operations. And because there's such a decline in number of COVID operations, they decided to leave it out in the annual report. When I briefed Parliament last year on this issue, I said they should ask the police why they don't include the number. They don't have to provide any other information, but at least indicate the number of COVID operations. I don't know if Parliament had a response to that question. Also, in terms of the impact that this has on business, showed you the mall robberies. This is the Grant Thornton International Business Report, most of you are familiar with, and they conduct quarterly surveys amongst their members, and this is the typical question they're asking, among some of the other questions, and we can see that in line with the overall downward trend in our crime rate until about 3-4 years ago, their perception, or not, this isn't a perception study, this was a real experience, but that also dropped. But in line with the increase in our crime levels, they also indicated from 47% to 65% personal experience of crime as victims of crime. And this, of course, has serious impact in terms of confidence in South Africa's ability to ensure investment and so on in South Africa. And I think this has become a deterrent in many ways to possible expansion by local business people. We know that's been limiting possible expansion, and it's also inhibiting foreign investment in South Africa's economy, which again has a very detrimental impact in terms of employment opportunities and economic growth. And all of these are disastrous for South Africa. Now, if you look at crime intelligence, as I said, they now don't give us the COVID operations anymore. And from my personal contact, I still have former colleagues in crime intelligence. They tell me they can't give us figures because there's almost nothing happening there. And this is why our crime syndicates are having a field day. There's very little focused crime. Here and there you have pockets of excellence, but it's hugely declined. But because crime intelligence is itself in such a mess with the whole Richard and Lully affair and people being transferred, someone who is regarded as an expert in especially the cyber space area in terms of crime intelligence gathering, Major General Mark Hankel, who was the guy who compiled the report that led to Richard Lully's suspension and the arrest and charges of a number of other crime intelligence bosses, is now transferred because had the audacity to compile this report. He's transferred to the inspectorate of the police, and I am told that he sits there doing as little as possible. A very, very competent, efficient intelligence operator sitting in a place where he is completely disinterested in being and therefore doing as little as possible. So it's just such a waste and a shame. But if you look at this slide, I distract myself all the time. It's such a mess, but look at just over the last 3 years, how network operations have declined. Operational analysis reports, but you have to break them down further, and especially if you look at something like station and cluster crime threat analysis reports. Now, every police station needs to focus its operations on the basis of its crime threat analysis. Now, there's been a decline of almost 50% in the last 3 years. So all of this is going down in terms of establishing and growing as far as your capacity to perform in a focused way is concerned. So all of these things, instead of growing, and I'm a little surprised at the profiles that seem to increase, but all of the rest on the decline. Also, the police service have increased over the last number of years. I call it the decade of expansion. Since 2001 to approximately the World Cup, the police expanded by almost 60,000 sworn officers or functional members. In about 2001, or 2001, there were about 100,000 functional police officers, trained police officers. They expanded until about 160. Currently, there's about 156,000. The total number of employees is closer to 200,000, but functional police members, 156,000. And this is why I think the police were able to grow the number of arrests. There's also large numbers in terms of searches and seizures and all kinds of operations. But the impressive thing is the number of arrests that grew from about 109,000 to 168,000. Sorry, 1,000,006. But if you look at the number of finalizations, and this is the worrying thing, the National Prosecuting Authority, while the police makes 54% more arrests than they did in about 2002, that is in line with the number that they expanded with each year. The number of finalizations in whatever way, either prosecution, withdrawal, and so on, have declined by 20%. Now, I spoke to some senior person here, I think from the Western Cape, on why this might be the case. And she, of course, says it's the quality of the case records that the police submit to the NPA. That's impossible for them to successfully prosecute. Some police officers would blame on the NPAs, and the NPA is in a similar mess at the moment, so they don't have time or capacity to successfully deal with this case. Whatever, the problem is there's a huge growing gap between the number of people we arrest and the number of people we are able to put through our courts. So the high number of police doesn't seem to make an impact. And this poor picture, of course, I mean, all of you know this is what we see, this kinds of cartoons on a daily basis in our papers. Police running away for criminals, no respect for the police. We see this kind of thing in line with the militarization. This happened in Vicksburg after Mr. Andres Titani was shot and killed. We don't even want to go to Marikana. Another example of police brutality, this guy is completely unable to pose a threat to anybody, but he's still being kicked and trampled upon. And then we have a witness just standing around watching this policeman kicking and trampling on this guy. And these are pictures nowadays, we all know with social media. These things are in the public domain all the time. So we are reminded, we see it on our TVs, we see it in the papers, we see it whatever social media network we have access to. And of course, this kind of thing. What a shame. What a shame. If I was still in the police service, I would be extremely, I'm still embarrassed by this kind of thing. Seeing a policeman in uniform handcuffed because they were arrested for corruption. The problem is, what this does is it reflects extremely negatively on every other member of the police service. And I want to stress the fact that there are many, many committed, honest, dedicated police officers in the service that are really trying very, very hard. But it must be extremely difficult for them to be confronted with this kind of thing all the time, because people tend to generalize and everyone is tainted with the same brush. And this is what in the Molen Commission came out. I'll show you the Molen Commission, just an abstract from what the judge said in that commission. Just looking at cases of police criminality and brutality, just in the short term, in the short space of 1 decade, and this is in line also with the rapid expansion of the police. We saw the number of criminal cases against the police rising by more than 360% until about 2010. And the same with cases of brutality, police brutality, more than 300% increase. Now, we can talk about this for a long time. I don't think we have time for that, but it largely has to do with what the minister acknowledged is that they forfeited quality for quantity during this decade of expansion. They've improved their recruitment process now, last year, so hopefully we'll see things changing over time. The interesting thing again, towards the World Cup, but also the Becky Taylor era. I mean, we all have our ideas about Becky Taylor, but personally, I think he was, he brought some positive aspects to the police. It's a pity that he tended to make very irresponsible public statements that we all know about, and then of course there was the whole thing about the building leases that eventually led to a report that eventually led to his removal from the police service. But many will argue that he had a positive impact on the police when he became National Commissioner. The year after he became National Commissioner in 2009, both those crime types decreased by 7%. Unfortunately, the mandate of the ICD changed when it became IPID, the Independent Police Investigative Director, has a different mandate, broader mandate, so it's difficult to compare. I'll show you now why. But so it's the World Cup, it's Becky Taylor, and interestingly, April 2010, the ranks changed. They brought back the old military ranks in the police service. And many people said, and I once had an interview with a journalist, and I pointed out that the militarization of the police didn't happen in April 2010. It happened since about 2000. And because of many things that happened, statements by politicians, statements by police leaders. I mean, Susan Shabangu, Deputy Minister of Police at the time, said to police officers, you must kill the bastards and don't worry about the consequences. Don't worry about the Constitution. I'll deal with it. I mean, and she uses the words, I've got a quote where she says to policemen, you have permission to kill. Those are the things that militarize the police officers in terms of their thinking. And this is the serious problem. This was the cherry on the cake in a way, the military ranks, but it didn't have the kind of impact that people were saying. This journalist then quoted me as saying that when the ranks changed, we saw this huge increase in police criminality and brutality. And that's not the case. The opposite happened. We actually saw a decrease. But still, even that decrease, we are still at extremely high levels compared to where we come from in terms of police brutality and criminality. Unfortunately, the mandate of the Independent Police Investigative Directorate changed, as I said, in 2012, so it's difficult to compare with what happened when it was the Independent Complaints Directorate. But we see in the last 2 years some improvements in the number of cases that IPID investigated. The only real problem was in complaints of torture, which increased, and then of course something that's completely new is systemic corruption. All the other cases, in spite of a very serious number of cases, still it's very high the number, but most of them shows some decreases, at least in the last 2 years. I'm running through this. You are welcome to ask me questions later if there's still time. I want to come back to what Judge Molen said in the inquiry that was set up to investigate criminality and corruption in the New York police in the early 90s. And he also made mention of the fact that most police officers remained dedicated and honest police officers, but all of them were tainted by the image of their colleagues that were in the media all the time. And I want to read this out because it's very important that when we look at our police, we keep this in mind as well and support those that we believe are doing a fine job. Regardless of the truth, it is the perception that often matters. And the perception poisons the relations between the community and the police. And we saw this especially here in Khayelitsha during when this was investigated by that commission. Compromising the credibility of the vast majority of honest and dedicated cops who need the community's cooperation to carry out their difficult jobs effectively. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let us support those police officers that are trying their best in these circumstances. On a more positive note, and that we really try to keep this in the public space all the time. And at every opportunity you will hear us from the Institute for Security Studies making mention of the National Development Plan and why it's important that this plan be implemented. Now, these are my last two slides, so I'll go through them quite quickly. The first is to include the code of conduct within the regulations and the appraisal system of the police service, and to do periodic checks. I don't see that that's going to happen very quickly or very soon. To develop a code of professional and ethical police practice, and to train and test members on this on a regular basis. Now, this code of professional and ethical practice should be then developed by a national police board, and I'll show you now why that is important. This police board will be or should be multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary experts. So it's not something that will be left to the police alone. So hopefully these experts, and it doesn't have to be us, but anybody from outside the police should be allowed into this. And it's important that they be supported, because they will also have to then develop what we refer to as objective standards for the recruitment, selection, and appointment and promotion in the police service. Also conducts competency assessments of officers and to rate them, because we know that many police officers are currently in key positions for which they are completely unsuited. They should not be there, but they are, and that has a very, very detrimental impact on the members below them, and of course to the community that they are supposed to serve. And then this interesting development, a two-stream system for officers and non-commissioned officers, which we support. There are many police officers who are quite happy to remain non-commissioned officers so that they don't have to apply for positions, they don't have to compete, they don't have to be transferred, and they stay where they are happy. But you have to make it attractive for them in other ways, and you have to train them on a continuous basis also to make certain that they can manage those positions. Yeah, and then officers, of course, something different. As far as officers are concerned, the same National Police Board, the objective criteria that we are referring about, they should be tested against those objective criteria. And there should be a mechanism to make certain that they are successful before they are promoted or appointed in terms of those objective criteria. Now, the interesting thing, the National Commissioner and the Deputy National Commissioners of Police should also be appointed by the President only on the recommendation of a selection panel that would then apply those objective criteria. So the idea is then that you have this selection panel that, in the way judges are appointed, interview prospective candidates and test them against those criteria, and then provide them the President with a list of names and say you can appoint a National Commissioner, but only from one of these persons on this list. So that would limit the ability of the President to do what he's currently doing, and that is to appoint anyone. I mean, we are currently in a position where the National Commissioner of Police is a social worker, basically. You have the head of strategic management in the police service who's trained in theology, and I've got nothing against preachers or reverends and so on. But I mean, strategic management in the police is a very, very important, it's a crucial position in the police service. And this is, so you have all kinds of problems there, and I think we're just part of this is part of the problem in a way. There should be more training in terms of professionalism, far as detectives, specialized units are concerned, and so on. By the way, when I spoke about the public order police units, in 2006, Jackie Celebi, the late structured those units, and he reduced them from 43 units to 23 units in 2006, because he said we are now a democracy, people are happy, free, they have no complaints, so we don't need such a large public order police units. 2 years later, we had the xenophobic violence, and we had to bring in the military because there were not enough trained police officers to deal with the situation. So I think this is the idea that you have specialized units who are equipped and trained to do what they are supposed to be doing. And then, of course, the whole question of demilitarization. I am now involved with the police secretariat and a working group that has to look at how we demilitarize the police. The police also set up their own working group. They involved all the academic institutions, but deliberately excluded us. Say we have no role to play there. And then finally, ladies and gentlemen, the organizational culture and subculture of the police service needs to be addressed as part, in my view, of the demilitarization of the police. And then, very importantly, the National Development Plan refers to the serial crisis of top management. And when we say these things publicly, we are criticized for pointing this out. But it's in a public document that Cabinet approved in November 2012. So it's nothing new. It's not us who invented this. That, ladies and gentlemen, is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I understand the buzz at the tables, but we have about 15 minutes. 10 minutes? Can I take some questions? Girls, over here.
My name is Tim Dunn. I'm a statistician. I'd like to ask Dr. Berger about whether there are not issues of support for the forensic sciences that the police need that are also part of the strategic issues that confront the service.
Thank you very much. Another question?
Good morning, Chris. I'm Verna Steelman, and my question specifically is aimed at the issue of gangsterism on the Cape Flats. As we are aware that that might be one of the key reasons for the high murder rates, especially in Cape Town. My question then is, do we think that there is really a will to address this dilemma? If there is a will, what is IS presenting as a possible solution? Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Hans Bohle. I've got a question for Dr. Neuss. We've been speaking about Russian nationalism, but what about the American nationalism? There's a perception out there that most of the wars that are fought at the moment are caused by the Americans to retain their dominance.
Another question, one more. Over here, please, Christine.
Morning, my name is Johan. I just want to ask Dr. Berger, right in the beginning, before he gave his glowingly pessimistic analysis, which I'm not saying wasn't factual, but extremely pessimistic. Why did he say that he didn't think the National Development Plan, why did he express some doubt as to whether that would be implemented? Given also what he said at the end, which is common knowledge, it's accepted by the cabinet and so on. So I wonder why.
Thank you. Professor Neuss, can we start with your question and then we'll go over Johan to your three questions.
Well, first of all, I would say, want to say that I learned a lot by your presentation, very interesting. And indeed, it's not a polite remark, but there's some discussion in Europe whether South Africa is on the verge of going in the direction of failed state. My impression is not yet. And I hope, the results coming from the analysis we just heard will turn it around. US nationalism and fighting of wars, Russian nationalism. But of course, the United States is interfering in world politics and considered itself as a world cop. Less so under Obama, and less so because I'm not longer able to do it on the same level as I have done before. But what they don't do is conquer foreign territory. And annexation of Crimea is conquering foreign territory against the prime objective of international law to secure the integrity of other states. And we see it going on in eastern Ukraine, unfortunately, with high price in human lives. If you look at the American government intervening in other wars, there is a kind of mission with the American history that other people would like democracy and human rights, and the idea that you could install it by taking away by military force dictatorships like Saddam Hussein, for instance, which I think the Americans are learning as the Europeans are thinking that intervention in other cultures is a very difficult thing, and the turnout is seldom very good, especially that I would say the direction of the Americans to go in, mission completed and leaving doesn't solve any problems. But it's, I would say it's less nationalism, but it's a kind of mission to give all people of the world human rights. I know how the Americans sometimes deal with human rights and democracy and rule of law, which doesn't is not successful all the time. Lately, the interventions have been reduced very much, and I'm not sure if it's so good for the people concerned. I mean, if you look at Syria, the war is just terrible, and American intervention is not there, not at least not militarily. It's raging on since 2011, and the death rate is tremendous. Same with Libya, when they were only behind, when the Europeans couldn't deal with, didn't come up with enough military equipment, and they helped.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Schumann, can I start with your question? My position would be, prove me wrong. I think my experience with current police leadership has not been a very constructive, positive one. And I have my doubts. But I'm, of course, hoping that this will happen, or at least part of it. I'm not referring to the whole National Development Plan, I'm referring to Chapter 12,
that deals with the police. And this was approved in November 2012. We are in February 2015. I haven't seen a single one of these recommendations implemented yet. So I'm hoping to see them. So that is why I'm skeptical. Also looking at police leadership currently, it is in a complete disarray. In fact, I am busy writing an article on current police leadership. I've conducted interviews with a number of senior police members, 2 of them deputy national commissioners, that were constructively dismissed by the current national commissioner. Both of them won their cases in the Labour Court against her, but were still dismissed. The same goes with the head of the Hawks in KwaZulu-Natal. 2 High Court cases and a panel that cleared him of all charges against him, and in spite of that, there were every attempt to prevent him from returning to office. And so I can continue. The whole Dramat case is currently, so the police service leadership is currently in my view, in a complete disarray. I doubt that they have the ability to implement any of these recommendations. All of them, I mean, will have to be a huge change. So I am in support of the National Development Plan. I'm in support of Chapter 12, and I will give, and the Institute certainly promised all its support to anybody who wishes to work on these recommendations. And therefore, we are now part and parcel of the Police Secretariat's reference group, where we are trying to make our contribution towards putting in place a practical implementation plan for the implementation of these recommendations. As well as forensics is concerned, I absolutely agree with it. But there's been some positive developments in the sense that in 2012 again, Parliament conducted a workshop. They called it the detective dialogue. And part of the detective dialogue was to look at current weaknesses within the detective service, including forensics. And a number of very prominent experts in the field testified during this, or made submissions during this detective dialogue, which the parliamentary committee initiated, and they then the committee itself compiled a report that was tabled in Parliament, approved by Parliament. It's been handed to the Minister for implementation, and but again, as far as I know, not too many of those recommendations have been implemented yet. But at least it looks like it's receiving attention. The Minister in turn tasked the Police Secretariat to work on those, on that particular, or to develop an implementation plan for the recommendations that came out of the detective dialogue. So a lot of positives there, but in terms of implementation, extremely slow. And we hope to see some progress. As far as gangsterism is concerned, unfortunately, I can't give you much of an answer here. I think the problem with gangsterism, we know, has existed for many, many decades in South Africa, and from time to time, there's some prominence, there's some attention to it, and then dies down. So your question really was whether there's political will. I don't see that political will, unfortunately. So yeah, that's all I have on that question.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is unfortunately all we have time for. I'm sorry to say. Can I get Johan to close down for us? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Just in short conclusion, the Centre for Constitutional Rights remain largely and hugely concerned with regard to the state of our criminal justice system at the moment. We've seen a couple of examples this morning with regard to operational concerns, practical, pragmatic concerns. However, this speaks to political will and decision-making within a constitutional framework. The state of the National Prosecuting Authority, the state of the South African Police Service and leadership has been referred to this morning. The criminal justice system is very much a leg of rule of law in South Africa, which is a foundational value of our constitutional democracy. If the criminal justice system is not functional, it means that equality before the law is not possible. If the criminal justice system is politicized, it means that equality before the law is not possible. It is not just about a functional police service and a functional National Prosecuting Authority. It's about services and agencies that can uphold the rule of law. And that is the real concern from a strategic constitutional framework question for us. How do we promote that? How do we promote the National Prosecuting Authority and police service in whichever format, whichever division, that would serve the people of South Africa in a manner that's independent, that's functional, that's professional, without necessarily serving any particular interest, whether that's political or otherwise. I don't have to explain any of the examples. The papers are full of them this morning again. But that remains a critical question for us, and we would like to continue that discussion with the experts, with the public, with political parties and leaders. We have to address that. If the rule of law fails in South Africa because of a criminal justice system that's not functional, our constitutional democracy fails. It's unfortunately as simple as that. It may sound slightly pessimistic, but that's unfortunately the reality. Thank you very much. With regard to our speakers, Professor Neuss, vielen Dank, Dr. Botha, Chris, thank you so much. It is a pleasure to hear experts speak in a field that they're absolutely knowledgeable on. The Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Holger Dix, Christina, and of course the chairperson with us this morning, also in capacity as a speaker. Without your support, these kind of discussions cannot happen. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending. Your participation makes this discussion possible. Please sign up to our Constitutional Alert newsletter on the website. All of these invitations will continuously be sent out, and the next date will be communicated soonest. Please be part of the discussion in South Africa. Doesn't mean you have to be political, but be part of the solution. Be part of the discussion, especially when it involves constitutionalism. You cannot leave it to somebody out there, whether it's politicians or anybody else, to solve the problems. South Africans must be part, you must participate in order to come up with solutions that affects us in our own communities. Thank you very much. Hope to see you soon again.